Good morning, everybody. Today we are going to talk about Langston Hughes and his two poems prescribed to us, I Too and The Negro Speaks of Rivers. In this video, we shall be talking about I Too, the first poem of Langston Hughes, followed by the second video on the second poem of Langston Hughes, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. Langston Hughes, 1901 to 1967, is an American poet, social activist, novelist, playwright, and columnist from Joplin, Missouri. He is an inventor of a new literary art form called jazz poetry. Jazz poetry has been defined as poetry that demonstrates jazz-like rhythm or the feel of improvisation, and also as poetry that takes jazz music, musicians, or the jazz milieu as its subject. Hughes is best known as a leader of the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance was an intellectual, social, artistic explosion centered in Harlem, Manhattan, New York City, spanning in the 1920s. At the time, it was known as the New Negro Movement, named after the New Negro, a 1925 anthology edited by Alain Locke. He published in 1921 in The Crisis, an official magazine of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. He actively participated from 1942 to 1962 in the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement in the United States was a decades-long struggle by African Americans and their like-minded allies to end the institutionalized racial discrimination, disenfranchisement, and racial segregation in the United States. His poetry and fiction portrayed the lives of the working class blacks in America, lives he portrayed as full of struggle, joy, laughter, and music. I Too is a very beautiful poem that is published first in 1926, which expresses the complete subjugation in the Harlem Renaissance. It talks about the American racism as experienced by a black man. In the poem, the white people deny the speaker a literal and metaphorical seat at the table. However, the speaker asserts that he is just as much as part of America as are of white people, and that soon the rest of the country will be forced to acknowledge the beauty and strength of the black people. The speaker of I Too is a black man. He refers to himself as a dark brother. Taken literally, this suggests that he is part of a family that includes black people who are not as dark as he is. In other words, the family is mixed. It has both white and black members. However, the white members of the family are ashamed of their darker brother. When other people, company come over, they force the speaker to sit and eat by himself in the kitchen. This family drama, of course, is more accurately thought of as an extended metaphor. It describes racism and segregation in America. The speaker is thus not just a single black person, he more broadly represents the black people's place in American culture. As the speaker describes his experiences, he also describes the way that black people's contribution to American history and culture have been ignored. The speaker has made significant contributions to American life. He is part of the American family, but white people refuse to acknowledge his contributions. They separate themselves from him, forcing him into the background. The speaker's resilience also suggests the strength and perseverance of black communities. Although his contributions are ignored and although he is abused by white people, the speaker remains confident in his own beauty and the beauty of the culture he represents. and he is confident that it is powerful enough. This beauty will eventually force white people to recognize black people's contribution to American culture and history. If we look at the setting, I too has two settings, a literal one and a metaphorical one. Most obviously, its literal setting is in a house where a family lives. The speaker is a part of that family. He calls himself as the darker brother of the family. In other words, the family is mixed with both white and black members. But the speaker is persecuted by his own white family members. The house is segregated. The speaker is forced to stay in the kitchen while the other members of the family entertain the guests. That said, it's best not to think of the poem so literally. Metaphorically speaking, this house with its black and white family and its segregated spaces is really the part of the extended metaphor that describes the entire American history and culture. The house is a metaphor for America itself. The events of the poem resonate with the complicated and the ongoing history of racial injustice in America. As such, the setting of the poem could also be considered to be America as a whole. Talking about the literary context, Langston Hughes was one of the leading figures in the Harlem Renaissance, a black literary movement that flourished during the 1920s in Harlem, a neighborhood in the New York City. During the Harlem Renaissance, writers like Hughes, Claude McKay, and Zora Neale Hurston worked to develop a distinctly black American literary voice, a way to express black culture, history, and identity. Different writers took different approaches to this task. For instance, early in his career, Claude McKay wrote sonnets demonstrating that he could match the giants of European literature on their own terrain. In poems like I Too and The Negro Speaks of Rivers, Langston Hughes took a different approach, rejecting the European literary techniques like meter and rhyme, trying to develop new ways of writing to capture the black experience. In doing so, he called on the example of poets like Walt Whitman, who had already started to experiment with free verse. I Too builds on Whitman's poem, but also critiques him for excluding the black experience from his account of the American life. Regardless of the approach that Harlem Renaissance writers took, they had a common goal. They hoped to combat American racism through the power of their own poems, plays, novels, and stories. In other words, they hoped that they might contest racist policies and attitudes by demonstrating the power of black culture. If we look at the historical context of the poem, I Too was first published in Langston Hughes' 1926 collection, Very Blues. It was written during the 1920s. This was a difficult and dark period in American race relations. Segregation was legal throughout the country. Black Americans lived as a second-class citizens, confined to isolated neighborhoods with poor schools. They often lacked the right to vote. The Ku Klux Klan was resurgent across the South and Midwest, intimidating black communities and frequently lynching black men. For many black Americans, it was a desperate time, and many black families left their homes in the South to seek better jobs and better treatments in the northern cities like New York and Chicago. In response to the oppression they faced, the black Americans built new institutions like the NAACP to fight for their equal rights. Concentrated in the northern cities, new intellectual and cultural movements sprung up with the black artists, poets, and musicians mingling in the blues clubs, speakeasies, salons, and galleries. These cultural movements were themselves very political, using artistic mediums to critique racism and press for equal treatment. It's also worth noting that all the time the poem was written, many white families employed black families and black people as laborers, cooks, nannies, and other forms of domestic workers. Despite living in such proximity, however, these workers were denied equal treatment and relegated to the background. I too clearly takes aim at such hypocrisy, criticizing the absurdity of white families relying on the labor of black people, while denying them decency, respect, and basic human rights. This is the poem of I too. Let's recite together. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen. Then, besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. That's very important. He starts his poem with I too sing America and ends his poem by telling that he becomes American himself. The line 1 is very interesting in this poem. The first line of I too establishes the poem's theme and hints at its form. The poem begins with a powerful direct statement. The speaker insists that he also sings America. This statement is an allusion to a poem by Walt Whitman that we did in the previous class. I hear America singing. In I Hear America Singing, Whitman depicts America as a diverse country with many different kinds of people doing many different kinds of jobs. However, they are all unified. Whitman uses a metaphor to describe this unity. They sing together, creating a harmonious choir that sings of a common song. Whitman's depiction of America is idealized, but it neglects many of the real conflicts that divide the Americans. For instance, even though it was written in 1855, just 5 years before the American Civil War, I Hear America Singing makes no mention of slavery at all. Indeed, Whitman does not include black people at all in his account of American life. The speaker of I too, Langston Hughes, objects to this exclusion. The opening line of the poem should be seen as a direct response to Walt Whitman. The speaker insists that he also is a part of American song. The reader learns later in line 2 that the speaker is the darker brother or the white brother represented by Walt Whitman in his poem. In other words, he is a black man. So the speaker is saying that black people have contributed and continue to contribute to American history as well as culture, that their contributions are as important as those made by any of the white figures that appear in Whitman's poem. The line is forceful and passionate. Strong, definite end stops at the end of the line underscores this passion. The speaker does not have any doubt or nor does he leave room for debate or dispute. Further, this line will eventually become a refrain for the poem that is repeated at the end of the poem. It reappears in a slightly different form in the final line of the poem. As you could see, he ends his poem, I too am America. It is a point of certainty and conviction, a fundamental belief that shapes the rest of the poem. The line is not in meter and it does not participate in a rhyme scheme. It is a line of free verse, and as you could see, the entire poem is written in free verse. Meter, rhyme are European poetic traditions. They emerge from largely the white, often racist cultures. In refusing these devices, the speaker thus strikes out to create a black literary voice independent of European traditions. However, his use of free verse also hints at the speaker's entanglement with Walt Whitman again. Whitman was one of the first poets to write in free verse. The speaker is using some of Whitman's poetic innovations even as he quarrels with the limits of Whitman's poetic vision. The reader should take this as a subtle argument about the scope of American literature. The speaker insists that the black voices belong in the American literary canon, that they can use its distinctive devices and resources. I also am part of America. I am a black member of the American family. They tell me I have to eat alone in the kitchen. They are the whites. When they have people over for dinner, that's what the word company means in the poem. Guests, especially the white guests. But I laugh at their hypocrisy and eat heartily in order to grow stronger, says the protagonist in the poem. In the future, I'll sit at the table when they have people over for dinner, he says. No one will dare to me tell that I have to eat alone in the kitchen then. He has a hope in the future. So, tomorrow, in a future time, he expresses his hope that being a black, he also would sit on the dining table along with the whites and eat dinner, and then the whites dare not send him into the kitchen for eating. And anyway, they'll all see that I'm beautiful then, and they will feel ashamed of themselves there. And hence he ends his poem, I also am America. The themes that are used in the poem, the most important theme that is used in the poem is racism and American identity. I too is a cry of protest against American racism. Its speaker, a black man, laments the way that he is excluded from the American society, even though he is a key part of it. But the speaker argues black people have persevered and will persevere through the injustices of racism and segregation by developing a vibrant, beautiful, and independent cultural tradition. A cultural tradition so powerful that it will eventually compel the white society to recognize black contributions to American life and history. Throughout the poem, the speaker insists that he is authentically an American and that his community has made important contributions to American life. The speaker begins by announcing, I too sing America. This is an allusion to a poem by Walt Whitman. I hear America singing. In that poem, Whitman describes America as a song which emerges from a diverse chorus of workers, farmers, industrial laborers, women, and men. However, Whitman notably does not include the black people in his vision of American life, even though the poem was written in 1855. The poem argues that these contributions have been consciously erased by the white people. In the poem's second stanza, the speaker notes that he is forced to eat in the kitchen when the company comes. This is an extended metaphor for segregation in the American culture. The speaker also suggests that the white and black communities are quite intimate with each other. The speaker is the darker brother in correspondence to the white people in the American family, which force him to eat in the kitchen. Despite this intimacy, however, the white members of this metaphorical family force him out of the view when the other people are around and when they have company. In other words, the extended metaphor highlights the hypocrisy of the white communities. Even though the white and black are part of the same American family, white people exclude, neglect, and ignore the black contributions to the American history and culture. Despite being treated like a second-class citizen, the speaker responds to injustice by declaring that he will laugh, eat well, and grow strong in the second half of the poem. In other words, the black people respond to racism and segregation by developing vibrant and independent cultural traditions. These traditions give them strength so that in the future, white people will no longer be able to ignore the contributions to American culture. They'll see how beautiful I am then, says the speaker in the poem. The speaker announces in line 16, they will see how beautiful I am. Further, as a result of the strength and beauty, the white people will no longer be able to exclude the dark brother from the table. segregation itself will break down in the future times, is the hope with which the poet writes the poem. The poem thus argues that racism involves a willful refusal to acknowledge that black people as just as Americans as anyone else. And it argues that this refusal will eventually cause the collapse of racism. The poem encourages black people to preserve, persevere, to deepen and extend their contributions to American life and culture until these contributions are impossible to ignore. The poem uses beautiful symbols like kitchen, company, and table. The kitchen broadly symbolizes the unequal treatment faced by the black Americans. In lines 3 and 4, the speaker notes that he is sent to eat in the kitchen when company comes. On the other hand, this can be taken literally. Black people are often employed as domestic workers for white families and tasked with things like preparing food and caring for children. Despite relying on such workers, white families would push them into the background, refusing to treat them as equal human beings, even as they benefited from their labor. The kitchen is thus a key part of the poet's extended metaphor. In the poem that describes American racism, the kitchen symbolizes one of its most perverse expression, segregation of the blacks. The second symbol that is used in the poem is company. Company in the poem symbolizes the white society. Company literally means guests or visitors. The white members of the American family seem to be ashamed of their darker brother. They don't want to acknowledge their relationship to a black person in front of the other people. This suggests that the white members of the family are hypocrites. They only hide the darker brother when other people are around. This symbol is key to the poem because it shows that American racism and segregation are rooted in shame and denial on the part of the white people. The third symbol that is used in the poem is the table. The table symbolizes respect, equality, and opportunity. In the lines 8 and 9, the speaker makes a prediction about the future. Even though now he gets sent into the kitchen, when company comes, someday in the future, he'll be at the table. To be at the table means that he would be equal with the whites. By the time the reader gets to this point in the poem, there is already a rich set of associations to draw on. The kitchen, for instance, represents segregation. The company represents the white people, and the table represents the equality. The table adds another important layer to this extended metaphor. It symbolizes power and participation, the opportunity to engage meaningfully in American democracy as an equal player, a respected contributor. When the speaker comes to the table tomorrow, he will no longer be a second-class citizen, but hopes to be finally recognized as the full member of the American society, is the suggestion through these symbols. If we look at the poetic devices that are used in the poem, the vocabulary itself is quite interesting. If we look at the words like sing, sing is writing or living in America. America itself is a symbol of racial segregation and separation when the poet is writing. And in America, in the end, ends with equality and equal status of the whites and the blacks. The darker brother represents the entire black society. Kitchen represents segregation and separation. And the word company has got an extended metaphor of white people, along with the word of table having a sort of equality. Literally, to sing about America itself, the vocabulary is concentrating on. But the speaker is alluding to Walt Whitman's I Hear America Singing, whereupon he wants to add the black brothers also in the white brothers list of Walt Whitman through his poem. When we look at the form of the poem, I too is not a formal poem. It doesn't follow any rules of the fixed form like the sonnet or the European poetry. It does not have a set of meter, rhyme scheme, etc. Instead, it is written in 5 stanzas consisting of anywhere from any to 7 lines. It's a free verse poem with the short lines and strong enjambments that the free verse poets often employ. I too does not have a meter as well. It is written in free verse. Like many free verse poets, the speaker favors short, heavily enjambed lines. And the rhyme scheme of the poem also is very distorted, as according to the European norms. In fact, the poem does not have any rhyme scheme at all. One might understand this resistance to rhythm and rhyme as a reaction to the whites, the European traditions. End-stop lines and enjambed lines are used in this free verse expression of the poem I too. It uses the enjambed lines and the speaker also employs the end stops, as we could see in the poem. Though the two devices do different things, they work together to build the poem's critique of American racism. While the poem's enjambments create suspense and surprise, raising questions about racism, its end stops may also convey the speaker's confidence that the racism will end one day soon. I too sing America. And the last line, I too am America, completely is expressed through the end stop lines and the enjambment lines. Allusion is the next poetic device used in the poem. An allusion is used to clarify something new or unfamiliar by relating it to something that the readers already know. In this poem, I Too by Langston Hughes, it has an allusion to I Too Sing America by Walt Whitman. I Too Sing America is the line of an allusion to Walt Whitman's poem I Hear America Singing. Something similar happens in the end when he says that I am America. Alliteration is the next poetic device that is used. The occurrence of the same letter or sound at the beginning of the adjacent or closely connected words is what is called as alliteration, as we find in the words like company and comes in the poem. Similarly is the use of assonance. Assonance is a resemblance in the sounds of words, especially among the vowels. If you look into the words, if you look into the expression like I am and be ashamed, I too am America, I and a are the two vowel sounds that are repeated for emphasis. Consonance is another poetic device used in the poem. Consonance is the recurrence of similar sounding consonants in close proximity, especially in prosody. When he says darker brother, the word ending sounds are rhyming with each other. So alliteration, consonance, and assonance are very wonderfully captured in this free verse expression of Langston Hughes in his poem I Too, to express the proper mood of the poem. The entire poem is an example of extended metaphor. The example of extended metaphor with a wider meaning is what is called as extended metaphor. Company, kitchen, and table, as discussed, are the examples of white society and American racism. The poem works mostly by extended metaphor, and the word tomorrow in the second half of the poem is really alluding to a future time when blacks and whites will be equal. This equality is well expressed through the speaker's assertion that he too will be at the table in the inverted commas, the next time they have a party. Refrain is a poetic device used in the poem. A refrain is the part of a song or a poem that is repeated. In this poem, the first line and the last line are refrains that are used. He starts his poem telling, I too sing America. This line will eventually become a refrain for the poem as it appears in the end final line, where he says, I too am America. The line is not in meter and does not participate in the rhyme scheme. It is in a line of free verse, and the rest of the poem also is in free verse, thus expressing that freely while singing on America, he becomes America himself, as Walt Whitman says in his poem. Polysyndeton Polysenditon is a literary device that uses multiple repetitions of the same conjunctions, like and, but, if, when, etc. If you look into the poem, when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong, see the repetition of the conjunctions when, but, and end in the first part of the poem. And look at the second part of the poem. He again uses these conjunctions. When company comes, nobody dare say to me, eat in the kitchen, then, when, and then are very beautifully used to give the expression a proper meaning of racism and the abolition of racism through this small poem written in free verse. Parallelism is another poetic device very well used in the poem. Parallelism is between the white world and the black world. It is also seeing the expecting an equal status in the society explained in today and tomorrow. So both the worlds, the white world and the black world, are beautifully contrasted in today, where he would never be allowed to sit on the table and eat, and tomorrow, where he will be sitting on the table and eating, and the white man will be admiring his beauty and strength. So, this beautiful poem, I too, has brought about a wonderful parallelism between the black world and the white world, with an expectation that tomorrow there will be abolition of slavery and equality existing. So, students, thus, in the end, let me add a few lines to the poem. The speaker begins the poem by declaring that he too can sing America, meaning that he is claiming his right to feel patriotic towards America. Even though he is the darker brother who cannot sit at the table and must eat in the kitchen. This alludes to the common practice of racial segregation during the 20th century when the African Americans faced discrimination in every aspect of their lives. They were forced to live, work, eat, and travel separately from their white counterparts, had few civil and legal rights, and were often the victims of racial violence and faced economic marginalization in both the North and the South America. The speaker does not languish in despair, however. He proclaims that tomorrow, with great confidence, he says, he will join the others at the table and no one will dare send him back to the kitchen then. Not only that, but the others, I put it in inverted commas, will see how beautiful, again in inverted commas, a quote from the poem, the speaker is, and will therefore feel ashamed for themselves for the racial discrimination practiced for such long period. This statement is extremely hopeful and optimistic. The speaker demonstrates a heightened sense of self and proclaims his ambition to assert his legitimacy in an American citizen and as a man in general. Thus, the poem can be explained to represent the true spirit of America. I hope you have enjoyed the analysis of the poem. Read the poem again and try and understand the analysis. Stay tuned for the next video. Bye for now.